So you get impacted, and you need to learn how, when you are in the enculturated gathering, where you can distinguish between what has been acculturated and what you want to embrace that is alternative, that is being enculturated. Get the DVD. And just press the rewind and listen to it again and again. So that when you come into a prophetic community, you are coming into a community that is an alternative community to the dominant culture around you. Now, I'm going to make some statements, and I want you to realize I'm saying the same thing that many of us are hearing. I may say it from a little different perspective because I'm a stickler for how we say stuff. Okay, and I think it's important that we understand that when we use terms like transforming the culture, because that's become a popular way of us describing things, I think, though, we need to be faithful in defining what we mean by that term, lest it become a buzzword and we not realize that word can mean a lot of things, particularly the word transform, because up until the late 19th century, the only place the word transformation was used was in the Christian tradition. Because transformation is impossible apart from the regenerating work of the Holy Spirit. And now, in the last 150 years, the secularist movement in the Enlightenment that matured since the 17th century has taken words like transformation, excluded God's Spirit from them, and adopted the idea that you can be transformed as individuals without God having anything to do with it. So much so that we have now adopted, and this is an example of acculturation. Everybody say, acculturation is what we need to be wary of because it happens unconsciously. It's subliminal. And we need to wake up out of sleep so that Christ can shine on us, so that we develop a consciousness of kingdom culture. Just stay with me. Stay with me. So the term transformation is now being used in the corporate world. It's now being used in the art world. It's now being used at a secular level and at a neo-paganistic level, excluded from transformation that was understood for the first 1850 years in Western civilization as being related to transformation by regeneration and the sanctifying work of the Holy Spirit. So that's why we need to define our terms, because you're not saying the same thing as people out there in the marketplace are saying. And so while we go out to the marketplace, you need to remember you're in the world, not of the world. You don't want to use the same terms without defining them so that you distinguish. Because when they say, and this is a form of acculturation. You ready? And this has become a mantra in Christian churches. And when I tell you what I'm about to tell you, you're never going to say it again. But we say it all the time. And we have now bragged about this. Now let me preface what I'm about to say with letting you know that I have a degree in psychology from Saybrook Graduate School and University, where I sat at the feet of the disciples of Rollo May, Carl Rogers, and Abraham Maslow, who were the fathers of the human potential movement. And I got my degree, my thesis, was in the work of William James, the father of American psychology. Okay? Now, that's important because William James and his brother were the sons of a man who was one of the key leaders of the New England Transcendentalist movement, from which has come not just Unitarian Universalism, but the New Age movement and folk psychology. Okay? So it is William James who, in an effort to separate himself from the Christian tradition and the Christian church, because he wanted society to abandon the idea of a Christological worldview, and the church was an enemy, not a friend. And so William James began to postulate you can be spiritual without being religious. And for him, religious meant you were a Christian. Now, Let's be honest. How many of you have said, I want to be spiritual without being religious? Come on. You've been acculturated. 150 years, and now you've adopted something the world has said against Christ, and you've demonized the word religion, when up until William James demonized it, you would have embraced the term because it didn't mean you were going through ritual without renewal. You were embracing what it means to be bound and devoted to Christ by the Holy Spirit. So I'm inviting you, stop saying you want to be spiritual without being religious, because it's not your tradition. You are not in the world. And when you use the word transformation, use it biblically. And here's another thing. You can't be spiritual until the last 150 years without the Holy Spirit. Until Enlightenment theory began to integrate into spheres of academia that ended up destroying the Christian tradition. The concept of spirituality was never divorced from the person of the Holy Spirit. Because you can't be spiritual. So when I was trained that what makes me spiritual is that I have a spirit, it was a secular setting in which they told me that was what it meant to be spiritual. And then I had to begin to wonder, based on everything I was trained theologically, well, how can you talk about spirituality without the Holy Spirit? Well, you can if you understand that as a secularist and from secular psychology, they don't believe God exists. And if you go to a secular psychologist, even though you believe in God, they may allow you to have that construct in your consciousness simply to help you cope. But in their fundamental foundational belief, they don't believe God exists, but they are coming alongside you because they think it's the way you are going to come into self-fulfillment. So I want you to understand that in spiritual formation, that doesn't happen apart from the Holy Spirit. Because for the secular psychologist, you don't have a soul. You are biochemically made, and everything that goes on inside you is a chemical reaction, even your consciousness. And by the way, I'm going to help you with what it means to be spiritual. It doesn't mean to escape here and go into the heavenly places and lose your footing. Let's stay faithful to the faith once for all delivered to the saints. See, you remember how many of you have heard the expression, too heavenly minded to be of no earthly good? Now, there is a certain truth in there. It's not the whole truth. But how does God show us what it means to be spiritual? He becomes fully, truly human. So if you want to understand what it means to be spiritual, indwelt by the Holy Spirit, you can't be a human being without the Spirit of God, because you were never meant to be independent of the Spirit. You were meant to contain and carry Him as a partaker of the divine nature. So to be a truly human being is to be indwelt by the Spirit, which is what makes you spiritual. So to be spiritual is to be truly human. So the more human you become, the more effective